Cinema Classics is sponsored by WCBE 90.5 FM, Columbus, Ohio, and is produced by John DeSando and Johnny DiLoretto. Listen to shows online at wcbe.org.
I'm John DeSando.
And I'm sitting in for Johnny DiLoretto, Mary Yerina. I didn't say that right.
Do it again.
And sitting in for Johnny DiLoretto, I'm Mary Yerina.
And I'll tell you, Mary, this time of year is a real drought for good movies.
It's not Oscar season yet, so we're in between the big summer blockbuster releases and the Oscar contenders.
We so are. So rather than trying to fish around for that connection that we make between classics and the ancient classics, current ones that we think are classic, I just picked a flat-out classic, now as far as I'm concerned, which is called Phantom Thread. So as looking through all the films that were available to us, that immediately caught my eye, and a big grin came to my mouth because I like this movie. That doesn't mean you have to, but I sure do like Phantom Thread.
Well, and it continues our theme this year of 1950s era haute couture themes and plots. So it's funny that we've done The Outfit starring Mark Rylance.
Thank you.
And we also did Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris,
right,
starring Leslie Manville, who also is in Phantom Thread.
Isn't that great? What a great connection.
It's the thread that connects them all.
Very, very good. And last year we had The House of Dior. What was the name of that?
Oh, The House of Gucci.
Yes, House of Gucci.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
With Adam Driver. So
yes,
we've had within the last year or so,
yes,
quite a few about it, and I find it fascinating. I find it fascinating because we have the best, what I consider to be the best contemporary actor in American film.
By far, and this was actually his last film.
You think? Do you have a message from him that tells you personally?
Well, he did announce after.
Excuse me, we're talking about Daniel Day-Lewis.
We're talking about Sir Daniel Day-Lewis. He announced after this film's release that he was retiring from acting. Now, he did retire from acting before, 3 years, where he went off to Italy to learn how to make shoes. But I think he's serious this time. And what's really sad for us, I think, when you talk about classics in cinema, he only made 21 films.
Oh, yeah.
And one of which was when he was a child and uncredited in a role
sure,
as a vandal in Sunday Bloody Sunday. But he really is probably the preeminent actor of his generation.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating that he only made 21 films.
And you know something, in the last decade or two, he's made them every 5 years. His #1 movies he's made, and so we still may have a little, well, we don't, do we?
Well, he's at the 5-year mark right now.
Is he? Okay.
Because the Phantom Thread's from 2017, and we haven't heard hide nor hair of him. Now, he's notoriously private.
You think?
He doesn't grant a ton of interviews. So
he's either doing woodworking or cobbling
or he's preparing for some penultimate role, because he's well known as a method actor and really took that
capital
to extremes in preparing for roles.
He really does. All right, Mary, you and I are talking like everybody should know exactly what we're talking about.
With Phantom Thread.
Right, with Phantom Thread. Give him a thumbnail of Phantom Thread.
So Phantom Thread takes place in 1954 London, in the world of high fashion. Daniel Day-Lewis plays Reynolds Woodcock, who is probably the creme de la creme of designers in London society at this time. His house is visited by not only countesses and princesses, but other highly successful women.
Everybody, yes.
And his house is run day to day in terms of operations by his sister Cyril Woodcock, played by Leslie Manville. And his creativity and the way he runs his house is based on extreme routine, from quiet in the morning to probably what he eats every day, what happens after he debuts a dress. I mean, it's all very orderly, and he also has a tendency to pick up muses who move in and become not only models for him, but usually his lover, and then their time becomes spent, which is set up pretty much at the very beginning of the film. And then he looks for his next muse and model. But their world is upended when the next muse and model, Alma, isn't quite what they expect or he expects, and ends up really turning.
She's strong.
She's very strong, and ends up turning his world upside down.
I know, and I love it. So it's not really a thriller, but it does have qualities of a thriller about it.
It does, because one, you don't know Alma's background. That's never shared. And you're kind of curious and drawn in as to, he just meets her as a waitress out, at this, he goes out to his country home and is out for dinner at a country inn.
Yeah.
And meets her and immediately becomes besmirched with her as his muse. And
this is played by Vicky Krieps. Would you say Krieps?
I think so.
Yeah, and I've seen her in Old, M. Night Shyamalan's Old.
Mm-hmm.
She has a peculiar, deep beauty.
She does. When I was watching her, and especially the way they lit her in scenes, she looked like she was coming from an old painting. The way her face is shaped and the features she has. She really would have been considered the standard of beauty probably from centuries ago.
I alternately think of Ingrid Bergman, who did not have the classic, but yet was incredibly beautiful.
Yes.
But not in the way that we often think of, say, in models and so on. So she's a great choice.
Although Vicky is very tall and did have the build of models today. Models of the 1980s.
And in fact, he was using her, I think, as a model in some cases.
Yes.
It's curious to me, Mary, as it goes along, it's clearly a battle of not even wits, but a battle of his egocentrism against her intrepid will to break into his life and become a part of it. Hard to see how you could love somebody like that, except if you loved him for his gifts.
Very, very true. When I was watching it, I just kept going back to, he's abusive, he's dismissive, but then he's brilliant.
Yes.
And there were moments, and she references it in her comments when she's talking to a doctor, that there are moments where he's tender and vulnerable, and that's when she loves him the most, and that drives her.
Right, he is most tender is when he's most vulnerable.
Exactly.
And she figures that out, so as a way of surviving. So I love the dynamic, and I love the way it proceeds. It also reminds me, and I'm not the first at all to say this, that this is metaphoric for all great talents and what it's like to live with talented people, and even for the film business, because Woodcock could be Hitchcock. and Mary says to me, "John, get back to earth here, will you please?"
No, I see where you're going.
Well, Mary, let me add one more turn to this
screw. Please expound.
All right. Alma was the name of Hitchcock's wife.
Very good point.
Who was instrumental in many of his, but never credited.
Well, it's continues to this day. Behind every great man is a greater woman.
Or now I think there's a great woman and man. I think now, these days.
I hope so.
I hope so. I mean, I feel a little bit that it's not so much just for men, but it has been traditionally.
Well, and I think I think we're going off on a tangent here, but I think in life, it's the people that you're connected with and that you partner with that help. If you're with the right people, they make you greater.
Yes.
And so I agree with that sentiment. And we've gotten totally off the thread.
Well, it's
Fan
not
of
bad.
thread.
There are many threads for this, and I appreciate it because people will be able to tune into the podcast experience on WCBE.
And I hope they will.
And then they will listen to Double Take, and we will be going into such things as looking generally at the career of Daniel Day-Lewis and perhaps saying a word or two about Paul Thomas Anderson, the brilliant director of this film. So we have many things to come, and your timing is good. You and I have been together enough so that you have a sense that we have no more than probably a minute or two left for the Phantom Thread. Now, Mary, where can people see this?
Well, it's currently streaming on Netflix, but I'm sure it's available through other services as well. And I would say, if this truly is the last film that Daniel Day-Lewis gives us as an actor, it's one of his best performances. He was nominated but did not win for Best Actor in this role as at the Academy Awards. But it's amazing. And we referenced that he's a method actor. He spent a year studying with a dress designer to learn the craft of designing and sewing, and apparently by the end of it he was actually able to recreate an iconic dress from Balenciaga. So as with everything he's ever done in his acting, despite and very similar to Reynolds Woodcock, I would say,
Mary.
and how mono-focused he becomes on a role. You know, he almost became a professional in his method of approaching, how do I study, how do I learn, how do I get inside this character, and it truly comes through, and it's one of his best performances.
All right, now Mary, what do you advise our audience? And I make a side note here, did your husband watch this with you?
He did not.
Okay.
He heard it was about fashion and ran screaming from the room.
So what do you advise?
I would advise, again, that it's a really intoxicating film, and in some ways erotic the way that The Age of Innocence was, where you're not seeing sex on film, but you're seeing the way they interact is highly tense, highly sexually charged, and it just brings you into what seems like an innocent story, and we're not going to give away the ending, because the ending
Is wonderful.
is wonderful.